Well, it's 10:30. Welcome everybody to Brainstorming the Human Connection, brought to you by the South Dakota Humanities Council. This program is one of interaction. It's about having a conversation. And each week we try to bring you a conversation that will stimulate you to think about the world around you and start to brainstorm what we have, what the questions are, what some of the solutions might be. And to stimulate that conversation, we usually bring on guests that have some particular expertise or something that they're working on in order for us to choose an issue. And this week, we're talking about leadership. Leadership is one of those kind of things we often say, oh, we need better leadership. But what is it? How do we get it? Who becomes a leader? What do we even mean by leadership? All of those questions often are put on the side, or often not even recognized that under the hood, that's what we have to consider. When we say we want better leaders, well, we don't know what better is unless we can define what it is that leadership is and what's good and what it takes, what's reasonable to expect from leaders. So today we have Rick Melmer, and he's the founder and director of Leadership South Dakota. So it's a Leadership South Dakota program, and it's well, we'll let Rick tell you really about it. So welcome, Rick. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Lawrence.
First, would you tell us first, who is Rick Melmer? Tell us a little bit about you, where you're from, and like your mother's maiden name and your social security number.
Yeah, I'd be happy to do that. So yeah, I grew up in a small community, Geddes, South Dakota, which is kind of in the middle of the state along the Missouri River. My dad ran a grocery store there, and so I got kind of work ethic from my father and mother early in life, and really enjoyed growing up in a small community where you kind of did everything. You were in the class play along with on all the sports teams and in the band and chorus, and you did a little of everything, and I enjoyed that. Went to school at Dakota Wesleyan in Mitchell and met my wife there, and we've been married for nearly 40 years, which is great. I see a couple of names, last names on the list of people here that I recognize. Widman is a Mitchell name that Betty Widman was a friend of mine, and just really enjoyed the family a lot. I did some teaching early on in my career and had some connection to the Widman crew. So and then I was a longtime educator, Lawrence. I was a teacher for a few years. I was an elementary school principal for about 7 years in both South Dakota and Wyoming. And then I was a school superintendent for 4 years in Northwest Iowa and 8 years in Watertown, South Dakota. And then Governor Rounds was looking for a secretary of education. I applied for the job because he really didn't have anybody. Normally, governors kind of pick their cabinet members. In this case, he didn't really have anybody that he knew that had a background in education. So I applied and was selected to be his secretary of education, which I really loved that job. I did that for 5 years, and then was a dean of the School of Education at University of South Dakota for 5 years, and then had this idea of starting a leadership program statewide. And my wife and I jumped into that, and we started Leadership South Dakota in the fall of 2014. And so we are just ready next week to graduate our 9th class. We take 40 people a year through the program, and then we've had a couple of years of state government as well. So altogether, we've had about 400 leaders that have gone through the program. And I'm going to be retiring. My wife and I are retiring from that next week. And John Meyer will be replacing me in that role. He'll do a great job in that particular role. But so I'll be stepping away. But yeah, I've been sort of knee deep in leadership, Lawrence, for a really long time. I love the topic, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to share with you a little bit today.
Well, when we talk about leadership, one of the important things to do is define terms, because if we don't have a kind of understanding of what we're talking about in terms of how we define the different words, then I don't know how much of a conversation we can have. So could you help us out by giving us a working definition, whatever people might be calling it? What's our working definition for this discussion about what leadership is?
Yeah, anybody that's ever read a leadership book could probably come up with their own definition on what leadership is. One of my favorites, and it's probably the reason why, is because it's really simple, and it's really from John Maxwell, who's one of the leading authors in the area of leadership. And he talks about leadership being influence, like, period, end of story, influence. Because oftentimes I think we think about leaders as they have a position on the org chart. And that makes them a leader, right? Because they're above other people or because they hold a certain position. But I can say, as a former school superintendent, that like in Watertown, we had 250 teachers in Watertown. That's a lot of teachers. And yet, if you were to ask me, are there some of those teachers that are leaders among the teachers? I would have said absolutely there are. Like, they have influence over other teachers in the organization. So it isn't about like where you're at on the org chart. It's really about, do you have influence over other people? And if you do, which almost everybody does in some way, then you're a leader, right? You're in a role of influencing other people, which then means you're in a leadership role.
What gives you some of that kind of power? What creates the aura of one that allows that person to have influence over others?
Yeah, good question. I feel like a lot of it centers around relationships. I think we're finding out as we evolve as a country that leaders are really people that connect with other people. Fun to see Angie. Hi, Angie. So leaders connect with other people. And if you cannot connect on a relationship level, then it's really, other than, you always have the fallback of like, here's where I'm at on the org chart. And it's like called position power, right? I have power over people because I hold a certain position. But really, I think what we're finding, Lawrence, is the real powerful leaders are the ones that have personal power. Like, people follow them or identify with them because they like them, because they respect them, because they appreciate who they are as people. And I think a lot of it centers around kind of character issues, which we could talk about a little bit more if we need to. But I feel like a lot of it is personal power. Like, they have that ability to relate to others. And as a result of that, they have influence over their lives.
Right. Well, I noticed in the prison setting, it's all about respect. If people respect you, if they think, oh, this person is somebody that let's say they mean something to me, and I don't want to disappoint them, and disappoint could come in lots of forms. Sometimes it's just objecting to something that they want to do or say or something like that. So you end up having people who lead people for good or for worse, because the other people see that, okay, that person has a certain amount of, let's say, charisma. I think it was my martial arts teacher who said charisma beats karate.
It's interesting. I feel like as you could tell by looking at me, I'm on the back end of my career, right? I mean, I've had a lot of years, and I'm grateful for them. But I do wonder a little bit about whether today's leader, not so much leaders 20 years ago, but today's leader needs to really be thinking about having people like them. In other words, I really like this person. Now, that doesn't mean, I think you can like and respect someone both. But I feel like the leadership going forward is going to be a little bit more about like getting people to genuinely like you. Like, I enjoy working with this person. I find value in what they have to say. When I was a school superintendent, we would have interview questions that we would ask teachers. And one of the interview questions was, do you want your students to like you? And we actually had what we called listen fors, meaning what the best teachers would say in response to that question. And the listen for that question was, the answer was yes. I want my students to like me, because the more they like me, the harder they're going to work for me. right?
Mhm.
I think there would have been a day, Lawrence, in my early leadership years where someone would have said, "Oh, I don't care if they like me. I
Yes,
just
sir.
want them to respect me, right? I want them to just do what I tell them to do." And I
Right.
just wonder, and this is where I'd love to hear from some folks that are on the call today, how important is it for people to like their leader? And how much of a difference does that make if you like your leader?
Right. Well, we're going to get back to that question
Good.
because I think it's a good one, and I hope that folks will be thinking about that question that Rick asked. How important is it for you to like a leader, or if you are a leader, how important is it for you to be liked, and why? You
Mhm.
know?
It's great.
Now, before we get into that, though, let's talk about what is the point anyway of leadership. Why even have leadership?
Well, I mean, I feel like somebody has to make decisions that impact. In this case, I would guess we're going to be talking about organizations, even families. I mean, like my wife and I have 3 children, and we had to make decisions as a family about a lot of different things. And if everything is a jump ball, if everything is a coin flip, then it becomes sort of difficult to sort of make progress going forward. So I feel like at some point decisions have to be made.
Right.
And I'm looking outside today. It's snowing out there. I'm a former school superintendent. These were days I did not like, right? I did not enjoy these days
Mhm.
because I had to make decisions about whether we were going to have school or not have school. And somebody had to make that decision. You couldn't do a voice vote. You couldn't call a committee meeting and say, let's all get together and talk about the pros and cons of having school today. I had to make a decision, and normally by about 6:30 in the morning, because the buses were going to crank up at a little before 7 and be on their way. So that whole idea of like leadership, somebody has to decide. Somebody has to make decisions about a family, about an organization, about a team. And I think that's why you have to have leaders. You've got to have them, because only way you're going to make progress is if decisions are made and progress is made.
Okay. So let me toss something back at you. Okay.
Okay.
I have a few groups inside the prison system as a chaplain, and none of them have leaders. None of these groups have been going for 8 years or so. We have never had a president, vice president. We have no elections. We do everything by consensus, right? We have put out 3 books, actually 4, 3 poetry books, 4. We have regular outside art, what do you call art exhibits, and we have a number of programs inside the prison to help inmates adjust. So one would say, well, how do you do it? Well, we have a system called consensus, and we develop policies based on consensus, and the policies dictate how things will work. If you have a program, for example, if you have an idea that you want the group to do, no one gets to, we have agreed by consensus that no one gets to like represent the group. They all have to come together before they ask the administration for anything or anything. When they have a meeting, people come together and decide that's a good idea, and under these circumstances, we'll do it. If you have an idea, you're responsible for taking that idea forward. If we give you that responsibility, you make the decisions about whatever it is that you're doing, but you don't make a decision about what the other guy's doing. And if you want to do something, it's up to you to push that program forward. If you need people to help you, it's up to you to influence others to come on board and help you. And at first, it was a kind of a struggle to get people to wrap their head around that. But
Mhm.
now that they've had experience with that, anybody who comes in and says, well, who's the treasurer? We don't have no treasurer. Who's the vice president? We don't have no vice president. Everybody, the moment you walk in the door, you have the same rights as everyone else. You put your idea out and we let the ideas fight. We don't fight. And then if there's one brother who objects, we don't move forward until we ask that brother, what would it take for you to agree with the
Mhm.
rest of us? And eventually that person, we try to satisfy that person's issues, and it works very smoothly. Now I don't have to say anything. The inmates teach the other people because they've seen how well it works, and they've seen how well it gets things through the administration versus the problems that other people have.
Right.
So, and now I learned that system because I grew up in it, you know. I grew up with Japanese, and I've watched their corporations work in the same way. So I'm just wondering, is there any other way beside a pyramidal system, an org chart system that you've experienced?
Well, first of all, I would just say you probably have a really mature team, if you want to call it a team or a group of people that are really willing to listen to each other. They probably genuinely care about each other. They probably really trust one another. And therefore, as a result of that, the maturity of that group gets to the point of going, listen, we can all work together to get this resolved. My hunch is you still would have within that group, Lawrence, what I might call informal leaders. In other words, people that others look to at times when tough conversations need to happen, or somebody needs to be influenced because they're not on board. There might be a person that would go over to them and say, hey, here's why we're doing it. And there's a respect there that causes them to say, okay, now I'm on board, or now I can do it. But it's interesting. I've sort of adopted, I really enjoy a lot of Patrick Lencioni's work. The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, Ideal Team Player, The Advantage are 3 of the books that I've read that he's written. And he is not a fan of consensus. He would say the opposite of you. He would say that if you wait for everybody to be on board, then you do not make as many decisions, you make less progress, and people lose commitment over time, because if everybody has to agree, and 1 or 2 people on a team of 8 decide, I don't think that's a good idea, and progress stops, that people start to go, we don't make any decisions around here, nothing ever happens, I'm out. Like, I'm not going to be a part of the team because we aren't making good progress. So it's interesting. It'd be a dichotomy for this group to think about in terms of how important is consensus? Is consensus necessary in order to advance? And you would make an argument that it's important and critical for your group. And I would probably make an argument to say, if I waited for everybody to be on board, I might not get everybody on board. Therefore, no decisions are made. And therefore, people start to go, I'm out because I can't wait that long.
So here's what happens. We have not one, but we have a number of influencers. And the principle that we operate on is, if like a rowboat, if you have a rowing team, all you have to have is one person who's just drops their oar and the whole thing spins out. You need everybody, not only in the oars in the water, but they need to be rowing too. Because if you just have the oars in the water, that's a problem, right? So, but if you take longer to get that person on board, 2 things happen. One, you start to understand that brother and he feels heard, as opposed to somebody who doesn't feel heard. And now when he does get on board, he's on board, right? And we have a commitment. We each time we say, do we have consensus? Is there anybody who objects? And we wait, and they know that they will be heard. So the result is, the people who are there, they work, and the people who can't, like, who they don't want to work with everybody, they don't care, or they don't want to wait for everybody, they leave, but the people we have left, they work. So for this group, over time, it works. And then when those people come back, when they see, oh, wow, these guys are getting things done. We never could get, so many times they say, we always thought we could never get the administration to let us do this. Now they're doing it.
Yeah. So Michelle asked a question about, does consensus decision-making work in larger groups? I would say, no, I don't think it does. I'm going to just say, the larger the group, the more difficult it's going to be to get everybody on board. And if you can say, hey, there's a group of 25, but 1 or 2 of you can stop progress, I would say that's not a good idea. That's not a good plan, because then you're really not then minority rules. Then one or two people can just decide we're not going to do something, and that's how it's going to be. But I will say, Lawrence, in defense of what you're saying, I'm a big fan of harmony. I really believe that harmony is how you make progress in organizations, and especially in nonprofit organizations where you need people are there. They're not making a lot of money. If they were making a lot of money, they'd probably be going, they do something else. They're there because they believe in the mission. And I think harmony is really important in nonprofits. And therefore, consensus leads you down that path of people feeling invested and involved in the decision. I would just say, in response to Michelle, the larger the group, the more difficult it is to maintain consensus.
And I would look to like corporations in Japan, where you have, they have rather large corporations, but the difference is like the people who are running it, who are responsible for making, quote, the decisions, they regularly have times when their whole section goes out to drink or eat together. And they have these sessions where they say, if you have anything on your mind, you have a beef with the thing, it's a no holds barred. Nobody is supposed, whatever you say here stays here, but we'll just deal with it if you have any issues. And there is a great effort put on keeping people, let's say, connected with each other, so that even their wives go out on the company sponsors trips for their wives to go out together. So the wives know each other, everybody knows each other. So they have those people who are outliers, but the thing is like, they know that it's a whole social thing of like, if everybody's on board here, man, what's wrong with you? Those people are not likely to do that. Mm-hmm. But if you just are looking at people as plug and play, and you have the person who, like, he doesn't really think that he's being heard, that person may not say anything, and you as the leader may say, well, we're going ahead anyway. And now you have middle management who says, I don't like that. Right. I haven't seen that work too well.
Yeah. So, and all of us are a bit of a victim of our past. And I, grew up in the nonprofit world largely, and with boards of education. And I, a 4-1 vote was the same as a 5-0 vote. A 3-2 vote was the same as a 5-0 vote. It doesn't matter. If 3 out of 5 said yes, we were moving forward. If 4 out of 5 said yes, we were moving forward. And I really admired the no votes that would say, I had my say. I objected. I didn't think it was a good idea. The majority voted this way. I'm on board, right? Like, once I've had my say, even if I don't get my way, like having your say and getting your way are two different things. But as long as I had my say, I'm willing to sign on, because you listened to me, you gave me an opportunity, decision made, we're moving forward.
Right. And I get to say, I told you so later.
Yes. And later on, I might say, I told you so, depending on how it goes.
There you go. Well, I'm glad we had this discussion, because I think that it's critical if we talk about leadership and we don't know, well, what are we trying to do and why do we have, certain leadership styles? I think there's often a lot missing in such a conversation. I want to now open it up, though, to our group. And do people have questions or answers? And now I'm just suddenly blanked on the question. We were going to get back. The one that we talked about was, do leaders should you like your leader? Oh yeah, and should leaders sort of attempt to be liked? In other words, is that an important quality for a leader? Yes. Anybody? Angie looks like she has the answer.
Well, I like Rick as a leader, so I would.
Yeah, and I like Angie too, so that goes both ways. I think Kathy unmuted. Do you have a thought, Kathy?
Good morning. I just wanted to kind of pick your brain about something. You mentioned growing up in small towns, that sort of thing, kind of a passion that I have. When I was just a kid, my dad said to me, think about a country road, a gravel road with the ditches filled up with mucky water. just remember that people are going to watch to see if you stay on the road or if you roll around in the ditch with those that are making racket.
Mhm.
So I just wondered if you could maybe share some thinking on that. Over the course of my life, I've come to realize how true that is, that people are watching, that you don't even know you're influencing, and later come back and say, can I help you with this? Can I be a part of this?
Right.
So I'll leave it at that, but thank you very much for your response.
That's great. Great thought, Kathy. And of course, your story sort of reminded me of like take the high road, kind of that idea of leaders take the high road. They choose not to get involved in the small little issues of controversy, but rather look at the big picture and try to look forward. It's almost like you sit in the back of some of my leadership seminars, because one of the things I like to say is, as a leader, someone is always watching, right? Someone is always watching. And I like to tell kind of stories about, like in Watertown, I would go to Hy-Vee, I'd be standing in line with 2 or 3 people, and someone would come up to me and go, so what's happening with the school district? Or what do you think of this issue? So in other words, the message was they knew who I was. I didn't know who they were. But the fact is, someone is always watching. So I was, my character and my actions were on display all the time, you know, whether I liked it or didn't like it. And before we got on the call today, we were talking a little bit about the idea that sometimes as leaders, we want the responsibility, we like the ability to make decisions, but we don't want to have to sacrifice the fact that we're on display. Like all the things that I say and do can be magnified. And Lawrence and I were kind of chuckling, you can't have one without the other, right? You can't say, I want all the opportunities to lead, but I don't want to have to make personal sacrifices. And the fact is, one comes with the other, right? And you have to be willing to accept them both. And I tried to look at it as an honor. Like if I'm a school superintendent, it's an honor for me to be in this role. I'm representing a large organization, but with that comes 10:30 at night phone calls, comments in a grocery store that I might maybe wanted to be with my family, but I'm now answering this question about the school. That all comes with it. And I have to be willing to accept the whole package, not just half of it, but rather all of it. Yeah.
Michelle, did you have a question or comment?
I do. Rick, can you talk about, so as a leader, you have a great deal of power because you are making a lot of decisions and you're influencing a lot of people. And, you know, I feel like it's a privilege, but I also feel like sometimes we can unintentionally abuse our power and hurt people, especially in a school setting where it's, you know, you're educating people's children, which is a very, you know, special place to be at and a very intimate place. So can you talk about like how you navigate like being in that position of power, but also, you know, being humble and then and not taking advantage of that, even if it's inadvertently. I don't think that we're malicious people, but sometimes we get carried away and make decisions and maybe don't think through our decisions completely and think about how it's going to affect everyone. So if you can talk about like that, like the power position, and then also what happens when you make a bad call and how do you make amends for that?
Yeah, that brought up all kinds of memories for me, Michelle, when you shared that. First of all, and Angie knows this, but I do a lot of work with the DISC personality inventory, and my personality is such where I am very in tune with people and I worry about offending people. Sometimes too much, I worry too much about that. In other words, I very much want harmony, to our conversation earlier. I want harmony, and I'll choose harmony over results. If I think I can do something where people will get along better together, I might say I'd rather do that than make progress, because I want people to be happy. I want people to feel good about their work. And so I was always I tried to be very intentional about listening to people. I would put myself in settings where I could get a lot of input in decisions before I made them, because I wanted to make sure that folks were on board, if you want to call it that. And while I didn't get them all right, because I would never pretend I did, I really tried hard to get a lot of input before I made decisions. That bothered some people because it took longer to make decisions. But I felt like when I finally did make them, I had more support than I would have if I would have just gone off on my own and said, this is what we're going to do. Having said that, I made mistakes. I made a lot of mistakes. And in fact, I learned more from those than I did from the things I got right. And the way I managed those was I apologized as a leader. I remember back to my snow, I made a couple of really bad snow decisions where I kept kids in school too long, buses got stuck. And when the radio program would call me and say, so can you talk to us about what happened? I was, first of all, quick to say, I made a mistake today. I should have sent the kids home earlier. I didn't do that. And as a result of that, 2 buses got stuck out in the country. And that's on me. I would say that. And guess what? It disarmed people from trying to figure out whether they could remind me periodically of my mistake, because I admitted it on the front end, right? So what Lencioni would say is acknowledge and admit, and acknowledge and apologize. Like acknowledge you made a mistake, and then say, I'm going to do better next time, or I'm going to try to make sure I don't do that again. And I found anyway, Michelle, that I think people gain trust and you gain support if you're willing to acknowledge. If I had a do-over, this is one of my favorite saying, if I had a do-over, I think I would handle that differently the next time. And I feel like anytime a leader's willing to admit that they've made a mistake. And by the way, we don't see a lot of that in our world today. I don't see a lot of it in politics today. It's like double down. I'm not going to admit I've made a mistake. I'm going to just double down on it and make sure that people know I'm very, very determined to say I did the right thing. And I would just be the opposite of that. I would be the type to go, you know what? And which is probably why I'm not in politics, or I'm not in some of those kind of roles, because I would be the first one to say, you know what? I probably didn't handle that the best. And I'm going to try to do a better job the next time. And I feel like that I gained support over time by doing that versus trying to pretend like it didn't happen.
Rick, how much is that influenced by the fact that a lot of people disrespect, and we were talking about respect being a thing before, but they disrespect people who admit mistakes. They see saying I'm sorry as weakness as opposed to a strength.
Yes.
How does the person who wants to be a leader, how do you balance that?
Yeah, well, first of all, they're wrong. I mean, like, that's the first thing. It's like, if you admit you made a mistake, you're a weak leader. Are you kidding me? I mean, I think it's just the opposite of that. If you're willing in front of people to say, maybe I didn't handle that right, or we could have used a better process to get to where we are today, I think you gain respect from people if you're willing to acknowledge that. Because, by the way, many people out there know you made a mistake, and they're waiting to find out, are you going to admit it or not? But I will say this: if you apologize every time you turn around as a leader, and once a day you issue an apology about something, then pretty soon people start to go, oh, well, that's just what Melmer does. He apologizes for everything and he thinks we're going to forgive him. The whole point is, like, if you made a mistake, acknowledge it, admit it, apologize, and then learn from it and try to get it right the next time, right? And if you keep making the same mistake over and over and over again, then I do think people start to get weary of, like, well, here we go again, we're going to get another apology. So part of it is learning from those mistakes and trying to improve on them.
Mm-hmm. Do we have any other question? Marge, did you have something? Okay. Do we have any other questions, comments?
I have another question.
Sure.
How do you have advice for working with someone who is good at their job, but who you don't really get along with very well personally, as their leader or as their boss?
Yeah. So you're likely not I don't want to suggest you're in that situation, Michelle, but there's a lot of folks out there that maybe look at their leader and go, I don't really like how they do business. I don't really agree with how they manage themselves. I'm a big believer that it takes a lot of different kind of styles to make a good team. So while one person might operate one way, I operate a different way. And together, I mean, it'd be like my wife and I in our marriage, 40 years, we're very different people. But together, we're pretty good because I bring something to the table that she doesn't. She brings something to the table that I don't. And I just finished talking to a person earlier this morning that's on a team of people. And she brings energy and optimism, and some of her team members do not. And I just told her, they need you on this team. Like you might feel like you're sort of out of place, but they need you on this team because you bring what a lot of other people don't bring. So the first thing would be to look at other people's styles and go, that's an asset if it's different than mine. The problem would be if the leader doesn't respect the other styles on the team. In other words, they don't look at others as assets. They just say, I'm the leader and all of you are my minions. Then that's a pretty toxic environment to work in. And then I tell people, you might have to look for a new line of work if you look at that leader and go, they don't represent anything that I value or appreciate. Then it's probably, and the market is good for people that are looking around for work. But I would say most importantly, it's like, can we appreciate one another? Can I be honest enough with this person to say, you view the world this way, I view it that way. Together, if we're willing to listen to each other, we can make better decisions going forward. If the leader says, you're right, I like that, great. If the leader says, no, you're wrong, it's my way or the highway, then I say, update the resume and start thinking about what else could I be doing that would add value to some other organization.
It sounds like in that kind of situation too, the person, risk not actually, let's say, losing the respect that they need to lead that organization.
Right.
And in a way, it's interesting because now in a sense, we come back to full circle, and maybe they don't call it a consensus, but it becomes that kind of thing where the leader is always trying to show the people who object. He gets, maybe not at a vote level, but in a team level, he gets them to work cooperatively and is flexible enough to see, oh, that decision that I was thinking that wasn't probably not a thing. Or the other person sees, oh, I didn't see where you were going at first, but now I see where you're going.
One of the things that we like to, and I think there's a book out by this title too, Lawrence, Chess, Not Checkers. And I like to say leadership is chess, not checkers. Everybody is not the same. If you have 8 people on your team, you might have 6 different or 7 different personalities, right? And the idea is, what does Michelle need? What does Angie need? What does Kathy need from me as a leader? And I have to try to flex my style to sort of make sure that I'm meeting them where they're at. Some people like a decisive leader. Some people want to be included. And I have to try to figure out what motivates the people on my team so that they can be the best version of themselves and our team can function better. But if you're on the disc, it would be a D style, kind of that my way or the highway, we're doing it this way. If that's your leadership style, sometimes people don't feel appreciated. They don't feel listened to. They don't feel valued because you're like ready, fire, aim, we're moving forward. And there's not a lot of listening going on. There's a lot of telling, but not a lot of asking.
Yes. Interesting. Anyone else have something to say before we?
Yeah, so it looks like Colby's on the chess, not checkers idea. So I knew that I have the book in my library here too. But I think just the big picture thought of like everybody's unique, right? We're not all the same. And the best way to lead people is to sort of meet them where they're at, see their talents and skills, and ask the question, can they add to our team? Yeah.
Yes, right. Going on, how do you develop good leadership?
Well, I mean, I feel like and Angie will probably remember me saying this in Leadership South Dakota. One of the philosophies that I have, and it comes out in a couple of leadership books, hope is not a strategy. Like I hope that people figure out how to be a good leader. I don't think that's a good strategy. I think it's a matter of kind of going, what do good leaders do? And then let's train people so that they become good leaders. I mean, it's like it's an education process. I just met with a group yesterday. It's a group of 100 people in the organization, and there were about 23 people in this leadership group. And most of them were elevated to their team lead roles because they were the best workers. They weren't necessarily the best leaders, right? They were like the workers that demonstrated competence in certain areas. And they even acknowledged, we have no leadership training. We're in charge of this team, but we've never really been taught how to be good leaders. And so we spent an afternoon together yesterday, and we're going to spend 3 more in the future talking about what do good leaders do? And how could you improve in that area? So I feel like it's an education process, right? You have to sort of take people through some steps, and there's a million leadership programs out there. So I would like pick one and decide, this is one that I think fits our organization. And let's be intentional about building our leaders going forward instead of, and I feel like one of the mistakes that companies make is we promote the best worker instead of promoting the people that really understand how to work with others well and can relate to others well and really have good leadership. Because leadership's not about you, it's about them. Like, unless I can motivate other people to do their best, I'm not the best leader.
Right. Well, that brings about a situation too, or it brings to mind that many people are, let's say, as you mentioned before, kind of de facto leaders. They don't, in the organizational chart, they're not in charge of anything. But whenever something needs to go forward, that's the person they ask, and sometimes they even decline the leadership role. They just say, I don't want, I'm just doing my job. But when the machine breaks down, and when you have to figure out a way to, well, what do we do while the machine is being repaired? They go to that person, not the president, because the president doesn't even know what the name of the machine is, let alone what to do with it. So in many ways, there's, as you mentioned at the top of the hour, there's the organizational chart leader, but then there's the people who actually run it, I remember when I worked in large corporations, I noticed, one of the things I noticed early on is that the executive directors and those people, they came and went, but the executive secretary was always there. And that new person that came in, if he wasn't on good terms with the executive secretary, he had problems.
That's right.
So they're actually the de facto leader. So when you walk in and you look at the organizational chart, it may or may not mean anything.
That's right. Right. And most of the time, the leaders that people go to for advice, wisdom, or input are the ones that, one, they're pretty good at their job. So they have competence. They have character. They can be trusted. They're wise. They give good advice. Those are the 2 qualities, Lawrence, that I think. So I always think character is kind of the foundation of being a good leader. Like, can you be trusted? Do you follow through? When you say you're going to do something, you do it. Are you sincere? Do your actions match your words? Do you show genuine care for people that you work with? All of those are like character traits. And I think they're fundamental to be a good leader. Then the second tier is, do you have competence? Like, are you good at your job? And if the answer is no, then you can have the highest character in the world. But if somebody said, but they don't do a good job, then I'm not going to identify with that person. But if you have character and you have competence, then you're in a position to really add value to an organization, and you will be that person that people go to say, I want your input, I want your feedback, I want your opinion.
Yes. Well, one of the other interesting, let's say, differences I noticed in American and Japanese management styles is often you could go to Bucho, or the person who's like head of a whole section, and if you walked into the office, you wouldn't know who that person was, because they would often be acting as like the janitor or something like that. But they knew all of the things what everybody was doing, So, and they often had worked their way up to that position, so they knew what all the different positions were doing. But when you saw them, they didn't have on any fancy suit or anything. They just had on their regular overalls, and they're going, but everybody in that company knew who they were.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
often they knew who everyone was. So if somebody's kid got sick, they would get a card, and maybe even the kid might even get a visit from that guy.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there was a whole different level of, and I'm not saying every corporation was like that, but just the ones that I knew,
Yeah.
that.
Well, and it's interesting. One of the questions that I think it was Marcus Buckingham, who does some leadership training. I watched a video of his a while back. And he talked about companies have to ask and be able to identify three things. One is what stories do we tell? Do we tell good stories? Do we tell positive stories about our company and our organization? What rituals do we have? What are some things that we do on a regular basis that reinforce company values, company culture, kind of tells a story about who we are? And the third one is, who are our heroes? And that's to your point, Lawrence, that you just mentioned, like, who are the people that when you think of our company, you think of them?
Yeah.
And what I found out when I asked those questions on leadership training workshops, it's oftentimes custodians, secretaries, assistants, people that do the grunt work. But people all point to them and go, that's our company right there. Like, that's who we are. That's what we value. And this person sort of exemplifies everything that's good about our company. And it's rarely the CEO. It's rarely the CFO. It's always somebody that's on the ground in the company doing the daily work. And everybody knows them. They know everybody. And they become sort of part of the fabric of that organization.
Right. I noticed that in small towns too.
Yeah.
The people who actually, you can have a mayor, and often people don't even know who that is, but they know the people who are there for them.
Yeah. They show up.
They show up. They show
Yeah.
up. And
Yeah.
so it seems to me that has a lot to do with leadership too. The people who show up, the people who are there for them is the ones that they remember. Even if they don't vote for them, they're the ones they listen to.
I would agree. Right. I see Trish has a question on Leadership South Dakota, and I will get to that if before we close, so I can answer that question for her.
Why don't we do that now, if you don't mind, Rick?
Sure.
Because we have a way of running out of time suddenly.
Yeah, that's fine. So I'm going to say a couple words, and I'm going to ask Angie to speak to Leadership South Dakota. She was an awesome class member, one that we have really fond memories about. But Leadership South Dakota is a program that's been going for 9 years. We take 40 leaders a year. We have sponsoring organizations. Angie came from one of those who picked their person. And then we have others that apply at large, like they're just, open application. The tuition is $3,500 for the year. And to Tricia's question, many times organizations do cover all or part of that tuition. And then we travel to 6 different cities across our state for about 3 days. So we come in on a Wednesday and we finish on a Friday. So it's a 3-day stint. And we go to places like Mission on the Rosebud Reservation, Rapid City, Sioux Falls, Pierre, Brookings. And then we have one community that rotates every year. 1 year it might be Watertown, next year Aberdeen, next year Yankton, next year Mitchell or Huron. So we kind of move around one community a year. And then we just cover a lot of different leadership topics. We meet leaders from all across our state. We learn about South Dakota. It's a lot of fun, and I hope good learning experience as well. I'm gonna ask Angie if she'd maybe just share a little bit about her experience in the program, because she was in it a couple of years ago.
Oh, I joined Leadership South Dakota, not on my own choice. I just one day, one of the leaders in I had just started a new leadership position through work, and they selected me as a person to go. I was scared to death. Going into it, because I didn't really have any mentors growing up or a lot of guidance. And so there was lots of colors in the room and everybody looked like professionals, and I just didn't feel like that doesn't feel like it's for me. But I would say that for me, it was something that really grew me as a person. I mean, like leaps and bounds of progress and evolution just in that year. And so I would suggest anybody that is interested in growth, and not even for leadership either. I mean, I think that just comes naturally with the growth and in the way that you have it set up, that it's a wonderful program. And
Yeah.
we love Rick and Val so much, like the moms and dads of
Yeah,
those who didn't have them.
Yeah, thanks, Angie. We enjoyed you as well. But what Angie mentioned, though, I hope other folks on this call heard that. We just had a conversation about this at our last Leadership South Dakota session last week. Some people have the imposter syndrome, like I don't belong here. I'm not a leader. That's not who I am. And we're back to where we started, Lawrence, like influence, right? If you have influence over people, which Angie did, by the way, and others do too, you're a leader, right? You belong in these groups. But too often I think we don't. Like, well, I'm not here, I'm not there, I don't have the proper training or whatever. Like, hey, you're there for a reason and you can add value. And it's been awesome to watch people sort of bloom a little bit during that experience when they start to discover, you know what, I have things to offer just like all these other folks do. And in my own right, I'm a leader as well. So
yeah, I don't like to ever miss an opportunity to suggest to people how to win friends and influence people. Whatever else you're going to read, I would say start with that book. Everything else is usually going to be just a riff off of something that he said in that book anyway. But read that book, and then every so often read it again. And don't just read it, do the things that they say in that book. It's amazing.
I'm a Dale Carnegie graduate, Lawrence, so you're speaking my language. I love it. And one of the chapters was talk in terms of the other person's interests.
Yes.
I mean, like a very fundamental, like, don't talk about yourself. Ask questions about Betty or ask questions about Michelle, like find out about them, right? You're going to be a leader, learn more about the people that you work with, and you're going to be more effective in leadership role.
Exactly. Yeah, lots of very interesting points in that book, and lots of tips on, even if you're not going to be, in air quotes, a leader, just the things just how you operate every day. But you will be a de facto leader because you will influence people. And once you're influencing people, you don't have to have a title. In fact, it's often better if you don't have a title. You become like a covert operator. You're moving things, even if nobody knows your name. You end up moving things because you have the butterfly effect. You move one kid by sitting down and talking to him about why he chose this color over another color in his coloring book or his efforts to draw something, and that kid gets a little bit more confidence. You've just made a different world.
Yeah. So I see Rich Widman is on the call. I assume it's the same Rich Widman that I know. This is like South Dakota, right, Lawrence? I mean, everybody
has the same name.
but I want to just say that Betty Widman, who was a teacher in Mitchell, and I'm assuming this is Rich, and Betty was Rich's mother. She was one of my best encouragers as a leader. She would call me, she would send notes to me, she would encourage me. And I just wanted to let people know that if you're working for somebody in a leadership, and they're in a leadership role, they need encouragement too, right? We kind of think, oh, well, they're the leader, they don't need encouragement. They're the ones that's supposed to give us encouragement. And by the way, that's true. A leader should be encouraging people that work with him or her. But boy, having folks that show encouragement to you as a leader really matter too. And whenever I think of Betty Widman, I think of somebody that took the time to encourage me, to always say, Rick, you're doing a nice job. I'm proud of you. You're doing good work. It really mattered to me. And so I just hope that folks on the call today recognize that leaders need encouragement too. That it shouldn't just be a one-way street. It should be a two-way street. And
as a result, you're actually influencing the leader, which means that you now become the leader of the leader.
That's right. Right.
So
and by the way, if the old saying, if you want something, give it away. If you want to be encouraged, then encourage other people. And if you encourage other people, you're going to get encouragement back. I mean, it's really simple. We make it much more complicated than it is.
Yes. Well, anyone else? We only have a few minutes left. So anyone else has a question?
It's been great, Lawrence. Thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, we're not finished yet, but I just want to make sure, because sometimes people, they have questions, but they wait till like 11 29 to answer. Ask
Yep,
it.
and I see Rich and Jennifer did respond, and so I was, it's fun to see their responses, and I love their mother, so, right.
What can citizens do to improve our leadership? Because I think we often feel like, anyway, we have a leadership crisis. What can the individual citizens do to improve leadership?
One of the things that John Maxwell says is most leaders get to their positions because they've been encouraged by other people to pursue those roles. So well, as long as I'm on the encouragement train, I would say, if you find people in your community, in your organization that you think have leadership skills, is to maybe say something to them like, you know what, have you ever thought about running for this office? Have you ever thought about, being on the city council or the school board? Have you ever thought about stepping into this role? I see something in you that's really a good quality and would help our organization. It would help our community. Sometimes that might just be the nudge that somebody needs to say, you know what, maybe I should do that. I mean, I've just had this person that I respect say that they see something in me. And a lot of times they might be thinking about it, but thinking, oh, well, no, I shouldn't do it. I don't know, there's other people that are like back to the imposter thing, I don't belong. And then all of it takes is a little nudge from somebody going, I see something in you that could really help. I think we should have been encouraging people. Find people that you think would be good leaders and encourage them to pursue those opportunities. It might be just what they need to step into those roles.
And I think it as a spinoff for that too, how do we encourage young people? Maybe they're only 12, so they can't be on the city council, but how do we encourage young people to see themselves in a leadership role? And when I say leadership in this context, I mean not just organizational, like kudos kind of leadership, but actually doing something that influences and moves their society. How do we encourage young people to do that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, and I feel like people that matter to them, saying things to them like, you would be a good leader, you have skills. I hear adults today say, my middle school teacher, my high school teacher was the one that told me, you can do this, you've got the skills. So, and many of the people on this call today probably have been encouraged by people that they, worked under, were teachers or people of influence. And that's why they're in the roles that they're in today. I mean, I did a workshop for some teachers a few weeks ago, and one lady talked about in her seventh grade year, the track coach said, you should join track. She went out for track and she said, it changed my life. I was good at track. I was a good runner. I gained confidence. A lot of things happened as a result of that. It was because one person on one day said one thing to her about going out for track, and she said it changed my life. So I just feel like we need to encourage people. We need to say it out loud to people that matter to us, that they could be good leaders. So
yes. Well, someone suggested the last question. I don't know if you can answer it in 2 minutes.
Yeah.
But
I could do it in 1 minute, and that is, I really don't know. So it's a little bit of a blank landscape for me. I do want to continue to teach a little bit, do some leadership training a little bit on my own. But it's a little bit scary. For the first time in my life, I don't have something I'm running to. I only have something I'm leaving, but I don't know where I'm going. We have 9 grandchildren and 3 children. And so I know part of it is going to be more present for the people that I love the most, but also maybe do a little bit of teaching yet, a little bit of leadership training if I can. But I'm kind of anxious about what the next thing is going to be. And I'm looking forward to seeing what God has in store. So.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Well, we look forward to having you around more and contributing more, because as they say, it ain't over till it's over, man. It's like, don't trying to go fishing or something like that. Those guys die of a heart attack.
There is no finish line, Lawrence. That's another one of my sayings is there is no finish line. You keep running, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Well, I want to thank everybody for joining us today in this stimulating discussion. And I really appreciate Rick coming on and sharing his wisdom and foresight and experience with the whole leadership, we can say kind of an industry, but the practice of leadership. Thank you very much. And thank all of you for coming on. And remember, this is an interactive program. The whole idea is not just to be passive, but to engage in the conversation, to exchange with ideas, because as we wrestle with those ideas, that is really when we learn. Thanks, everybody, and see you next week, same time, same station, on a brand new show.
Thanks, everybody.